Welcome to Uncorking the Issues, the podcast where we pour clarity into Temecula Valley politics. I'm your host, Grapevine. This podcast discusses political and civic issues. The views expressed are solely those of the host and guests and do not represent any political party, campaign, school district, or government entity. This episode is titled, Who Draws the Lines? Who Holds the Power? It takes a deep dive into California Proposition 50, why it came about, what problem it was designed to address, and how it affects Temecula, Murrieta, and Menifee, especially through the congressional districts each city is currently part of. This is a conversation about representation, accountability, and why the lines on a map matter more than most people realize. Let's begin. Proposition 50 did not emerge in isolation. It came out of a national crisis in confidence around American democracy, particularly when it comes to redistricting. After the 2020 census, many states moved aggressively to redraw congressional maps in ways that protected political power rather than reflected population change. Communities were split apart. Minority voting strength was weakened. Districts were engineered so that general elections became predictable and competition nearly disappeared. This wasn't accidental. It was strategic. In state after state, redistricting became a tool to lock an advantage for a decade at a time. And even when courts intervened, elections often proceeded under flawed maps. Once power was secured, accountability became harder to restore. California had taken a different approach. Years earlier, voters created an independent citizens redistricting commission, removing map-making from direct political control. The goal was fairness, transparency, and trust. By most measures, it worked. California's maps better reflected demographic shifts and preserved communities of interest. But fairness in one state does not offset manipulation in others. Congress is a national body. When enough states distort representation, the balance of power changes for everyone, including Californians. Playing by ideal rules in an uneven system can unintentionally weaken democratic outcomes. That reality is why Proposition 50 came about. Proposition 50 allows the California legislature to adopt congressional district maps for a limited window, the 2026, 2028, and 2030 elections. After that, the Independent Redistricting Commission resumes control. This applies only to U.S. congressional districts. It does not affect state legislative districts, cities, counties, or school boards. Supporters of Prop 50 described it as a temporary safeguard, not a permanent change. The argument was that democracy requires defense when national norms are being eroded. This was not about abandoning reform. It was about protecting representation during a volatile moment. Now let's talk about what this means for Temecula Valley. Currently, Temecula and Murrieta are both located in California's 48th Congressional District. This district has long been considered politically safe. Safe districts can feel stable, but they come with consequences. When outcomes are predictable, candidates face less pressure to engage with a broad range of voters. People who don't align with the dominant political profile often feel ignored. Turnout can stagnate. Accountability weakens. That doesn't mean residents in Temecula and Murrieta are disengaged. It means the structure of the district limits how much engagement changes outcomes. Under Proposition 50's legislature-adopted maps, districts like the 48th are likely to be rebalanced. That could mean Temecula and Murrieta are grouped with neighboring communities that reflect California's changing demographics. Younger voters, more diverse households, and families facing shared challenges like housing affordability, transportation access, and healthcare costs. More competition changes incentives. Candidates must listen more closely, and voters are harder to ignore. Now let's turn to Menifee. Menifee is currently located in California's 41st Congressional District, one of the larger and more geographically spread districts in Riverside County. Menifee is also one of the fastest growing cities in the region. Growth brings opportunity, but it also brings pressure on infrastructure, schools, housing, and public services. Large districts often dilute the voices of fast-growing cities, especially when those cities are not the political center of the district. Representatives covering vast areas may struggle to give consistent attention to newer or rapidly changing communities. Proposition 50 opens the possibility for districts that better reflect population growth and shared interests rather than sheer geographic size. For Menifee, that could mean representation that is more responsive to the realities of growth, not just legacy political priorities. Here's why this matters beyond party labels. Safe districts, whether conservative or liberal, tend to reduce democratic pressure. When elections feel predetermined, voters disengage. When voters disengage, accountability erodes. Proposition 50 was designed to disrupt that cycle, not by changing local values, but by changing political incentives. Competitive districts encourage higher voter turnout, broader policy discussions, and less reliance on fear-based messaging. They create conditions where elected officials must respond to a wider range of concerns. That's not about ideology. That's about democracy functioning as intended. It's also important to be clear about what Proposition 50 does not do. It does not raise taxes. It does not mandate school curriculum. It does not control school boards. It does not override local governments. What it does is influence who represents Temecula, Murrieta, and Menifee in Congress, and how responsive that representation must be to a changing electorate. Federal representatives shape national policy debates that directly affect daily life. Education funding, civil rights enforcement, healthcare access, environmental protections, and infrastructure investment. Local politics are never fully local. They are shaped by national decisions and priorities. Critics of Proposition 50 argue that it undermines the spirit of independent redistricting. That concern deserves serious consideration. Transparency and public trust are essential, but context matters. Prop 50 was not designed as a permanent power grab. It was time-limited, targeted, and focused on congressional districts during a period of national imbalance. Supporters argue that protecting democracy sometimes requires flexibility, not rigidity. Democracy is not static. It survives by adapting to threats, not ignoring them. So here is the takeaway for Temecula Valley. Proposition 50 came about because California confronted a difficult reality. When representation is distorted elsewhere, fairness at home may not be enough. For Temecula and Murrieta in the 48th District and Menifee in the 41st, this measure could mean more competitive elections, more responsive representation, and a political environment where voters carry more weight. You don't have to agree with every outcome to understand the purpose. You just have to believe that democracy works best when representation reflects people, not outdated maps. Thank you for listening to Uncorking the Issues. I'm Grapevine. If this episode brought clarity, share it, talk about it, and stay engaged. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep demanding accountability, and keep pouring clarity into Temecula Valley politics.